Matchmaking every top 10 fighter in the UFC. Heavyweight division. We've already got a fight between two ranked heavyweights between Sergey Pavlovich and Rozenstruik, so I'm going to skip that fight since they're obvious, or skip those guys since they're both already booked. The first fight I would make would be Sergey Spivak versus Marcos Rogerio de Lima. It makes sense. Spivak is lost to most guys ranked above him. He's just been finished by Jelton Almeida in the first round. Marcos Rogerio de Lima's coming off a win over, I think it was Justin Tafa. It kind of makes sense. Give Spivak somebody ranked below him. I guess give Marcos Rogerio de Lima somebody ranked above him. It's just a fight that I think makes sense in their current stage of their career. Probably a winnable fight for Spivak to get back on track. So I'd do Sergey Spivak versus Marcos Rogerio de Lima. Then I'd do Derek Lewis versus Shamil Gaziev. Now, obviously, Gaziev's booked against Thomas Peterson for UFC Saudi Arabia. He's probably going to maul Thomas Peterson. I think Lewis versus Gaziev is actually an interesting fight because, obviously, Gaziev has been finished by Rozenstruik, just beat Dontel Mays. If he can beat Thomas Peterson as well, he's going to want somebody in the rankings. And I think Derek Lewis versus Gaziev is quite a big fight because Gaziev... he's already quite a big name in the heavyweight division. Obviously, Derek Lewis is a huge name as well. I think this could be an interesting fight. It's either going to be Derek Lewis getting mauled by Shamil Gaziev, and we can finally start to see Gaziev kind of get in the top 10, or it's going to be Derek Lewis going out there and sleeping Shamil Gaziev and kicking him out the rankings. I think that's quite a good fight to make for both of their careers. Gaziev versus Lewis, maybe like a Fight Night main event in Houston. Maybe we do like another UFC St. Louis next year with Derek Lewis and Shamil Gaziev, if obviously Gaziev can get past Thomas Peterson. The next fight I would make would be Curtis Blades versus Marcin Tybura. Now, obviously, they're both booked. Blades is booked against Rizvan Kuniev. Marcin Tybura is booked against Mick Parkin. Now, assuming that they both win their fights, obviously they're not against another top 10 fighter, which is why I've not crossed them off already. But assuming that they both win their fights, I think it's kind of the only fight that really makes sense. I would have done Cyril Gane versus Curtis Blades because obviously Blades has only really lost to Tom Aspinall recently, and he also finished Jelton Almeida. So I think if Blades can beat Rizvan Kuniev and Marcin Tybura can go out there and beat Mick Parkin, who's a bit of a prospect in the heavyweight division. I think we do Marcin Tybura, who's on a 2-fight winning streak against Curtis Blades. It gets Tybura in the top 5 or a top 5 opponent. It's another winnable fight for Curtis Blades, considering he's already been finished by Pavlovich. He's already been finished by Tom Aspinall. He's already beaten Alexander Volkov before. And if Blades can beat Marcin Tybura, give him like a #1 contender fight. And if Tybura can somehow beat Curtis Blades, he's going to be in a 3-fight winning streak and he's going to be in the top 5. So Blades versus Tybura, if Tybura can beat Parkin and Blades can beat Kuniev. Because either way, beating Kuniev doesn't really do anything because he's unranked. Next fight I would do would be Cyril Gane versus Jelton Almeida. We need to stop giving Cyril Gane easy fights. It seems like we keep giving Cyril Gane these easy paths to the title. He's already had 2 title shots, and he's been beaten badly in both of them. He got slammed by Ngannou, he got submitted by John Jones. His best wins are Tatu Ivaza, a robbery win over Alexander Volkov recently. I know he beat him back in 2020 as well. And Sergey Spivak. Gane hasn't beaten any top contender. He hasn't beaten Curtis Blades. He hasn't fought Sergey Pavlovich. He hasn't fought Tom Aspinall. He hasn't beaten any tough opponent. Let's give him the toughest stylistic test for him in the entirety of the division. And that's Jelton Almeida, a nightmare grappler. Almeida is one of the best up-and-coming guys in the heavyweight division. I feel like he's kind of underrated as a prospect. I actually think he's one of the toughest tests for Tom Aspinall in the division. He's a nightmare grappler, one of the best in the heavyweight division, if not the best. Just finished Sergey Spivak. He was dominating Curtis Blades in the first round as well. I think we give Jelton Almeida a #1 contender fight against Cyril Gane. I think the winner of this fight could potentially maybe go on to fight the winner of John Jones. Well, maybe not the winner of John Jones and Tom Aspinall, because if Jones wins, no one wants to see Jones versus Gane too. But I think it could definitely be a #1 contender fight. Striker versus grappler. Gane versus Almeida. Almeida's been calling him out. Let's do it because we need to stop giving Gane these easy paths to the title. And then the title fight in the heavyweight division obviously needs to be John Jones versus Tom Aspinall. It goes without saying, Aspinall's the interim champion. It's one of the most highly anticipated fights of 2025. It needs to happen. John Jones versus Tom Aspinall, get it done. And then I think the winner of John Jones and Tom Aspinall, if there's a #1 contender that's earned it more than anyone, it's Alexander Volkov. I know Volkov's coming off a loss to Cyril Gane, but he should have won that fight. And had he won that fight, and if the judges had given him the right guy, the right win, I think he would have been on a 5-fight winning streak. 3 of them coming by way of finish. He's finished Rozenstruik. He's finished Romanov. He went out there and finished Tatu Ivaza. He battered Sergey Pavlovich. He was beating Cyril Gane as well, and he should have got the win in that fight. I think Volkov deserves a crack at the winner of John Jones and Tom Aspinall. I don't mind the idea of Alex Pereira moving up to the heavyweight division, but if there's any heavyweight contender who's earned it, it's going to be Alexander Volkov. Almeida's been finished by Curtis Blades. He hasn't beaten a top contender. Gane still hasn't beaten a top contender, and he just got a robbery win over Volkov. Give Volkov, maybe, it should have been like Volkov against, maybe you do Volkov versus Almeida as a #1 contender fight instead, but I think if there's any guy in the heavyweight division that earns that #1 contender fight at this stage, it's going to be Alexander Volkov. Moving on to the light heavyweight division, the first fight I would make, obviously we've already got Alex Pereira and Ankalaev booked, and we've also got Blachowicz and Ulberg booked, so we can obviously cross those guys off, but the first fight I would make would be Johnny Walker versus Bogdan Guskov 2. Bogdan Guskov, I mean, this fight was scheduled for UFC 311. Bogdan Guskov fought Billy Alakana instead, got the finish, but he was losing that first round to Billy Alakana, who was from a different promotion on 5 days' notice, and obviously beating him doesn't really do anything for his career. So I think we simply just reschedule it. I mean, who else is Bogdan Guskov going to fight? Nikita Krylov, has he really earned that fight yet? He doesn't deserve anybody in the top 5. I think we just reschedule him against Johnny Walker. I really like this matchup because I can see Johnny Walker pulling off a win because of how defensively dumb Bogdan Guskov is, but I can also obviously see Bogdan landing the shot against Johnny Walker. You've got a powerful guy versus a chinny guy. I can see it definitely ending in a stoppage shot. Johnny Walker, Bogdan Guskov, reschedule it, gets Guskov in the top 10. Potential comeback win for Johnny Walker. I don't mind that fight. Next fight I would do would be Volkan Oezdemir versus Zhang Mingyang. If we're going to give the likes of Gregory Rodriguez, Jared Cannonier in the middleweight division, and we're going to give a lot of these guys top 10 fights, I think Zhang Mingyang's at that stage in his career where in a division that's kind of shallow, like the light heavyweight division, give him somebody in the top 10. I think he's got 18 wins, all of them coming by way of finish. All of the knockouts that he's got of those wins, all in the very first round. He's got 3 first-round knockouts in the UFC so far, I believe. Dangerous, dangerous striker, brutal guy. Give him somebody in the top 10. Don't give him like, just don't do like Anthony Smith versus Zhang Mingyang, because if there's that slight chance that Anthony Smith can beat Zhang Mingyang, you've just lost one of your best prospects. Do him versus Volkan Oezdemir. I think this will be a complete banger because I could see it's no way that fight's going the distance. Volkan Oezdemir, pretty powerful striker, solid boxer, a bit of a veteran in the light heavyweight division. Zhang Mingyang, this all guns blazing, extremely hard-hitting light heavyweight prospect. I don't mind this fight at all. Give him Volkan Oezdemir, get him in the top 10. He's just recently won by knockout at UFC Macau. Zhang Mingyang versus Volkan Oezdemir, who's just lost to Carlos Ulberg. I like that fight, and I think it should be made. Next fight in the light heavyweight division, Jamal Hill versus Nikita Krylov. I don't like these matchups between like Jamal Hill, and we keep giving him these top 5 guys because, let's be honest, Jamal Hill might be one of the worst, and I'm not even just doing this to hate on Jamal Hill, but he might be one of the worst modern champions in UFC history. If you look at his best wins, he knocked out Johnny Walker. Well done, you've knocked out the chinniest guy in the division who's also on a bit of a losing streak anyway. You beat Glover Teixeira by decision when Glover Teixeira was 42 years old. Fair enough, he was the champion, but it was a 42-year-old Glover Teixeira. And apart from that, you've not beat anyone. He's been knocked out by Alex Pereira in the first round. He got finished by Yuri Prohaska. How good is Jamal Hill? We need to see him against like somebody in the top 10. And I know a lot of people want to see the Roundtree fight. I think if we would have booked him against Roundtree, that would have made more sense, in my opinion, to do instead of the Yuri fight. So I think we do Jamal Hill versus Nikita Krylov. Nikita Krylov's been out the sport for 2 years, but he is still on a 3-fight winning streak. He's been trying to make this comeback. He was supposed to fight Azamat Murzakanov, didn't manage to get that fight done. So I think we do Jamal Hill versus Nikita Krylov. If Nikita Krylov can beat Jamal Hill, he's just beating a big name and he's in the top 5 of the light heavyweight division, pretty much in title contention. And if Jamal Hill can beat Nikita Krylov, he's got a good win to get back on track. Maybe you do this as like a fight night main event, and then from there Jamal Hill can maybe get back in the title picture and fight the likes of Jan Blachowicz and maybe a Rakic or a Carlos Ulberg or somebody like that. So Jamal Hill, Nikita Krylov, I think it's a good fight to kind of test how good Hill is in the division. Next fight would be Alexander Rakic versus Dominic Reyes. I think Reyes might have just been booked. I think he's fighting, it might be Nikita Krylov, or I forgot who he's booked against, but I really like Dominic Reyes versus Alexander Rakic. Reyes is on a 2-fight winning streak in 2024, finished Dustin Jacoby, finished Anthony Smith, so we finished 2 pretty dangerous, well, not dangerous guys, I mean Dustin Jacoby's dangerous, but he's got two pretty solid wins. He's no longer washed. Honestly, I think we give Reyes somebody in the top 5. If Reyes can somehow make it back into the top 5 after previously being called the most washed fighter in the UFC, what a career turnaround that is for Dominic Reyes. And I feel like Rakic is actually a really winnable fight for Reyes, because Reyes is way more dangerous than Rakic, and from a technique perspective, I actually think Reyes is a better fighter than Rakic overall. If Rakic can beat Dominic Reyes, he's just beat Reyes, which is a big name, and it's a big name in a good stage of his career as well. That gets Rakic back on track, and to be fair, I don't even think Rakic should be ranked top 5, because who has he beat? So if we want to get Dominic Reyes in the top 5 of the light heavyweight division, and we don't want to make him face the killers, let's do Reyes versus Rakic, 2-fight winning streak, former title contender, should have beaten John Jones, against the guy who is a very winnable fight for Reyes and can also get him in the top 5. Reyes, Rakic. Next fight would be, for me, Jan Blachowicz versus Carlos Ulberg, and the winner can take on Yuri Prohaska. Yeah, I really like this matchup. I think the winner of Jan Blachowicz and Carlos Ulberg can take on Yuri Prohaska. I like the idea of that fight. Yuri is just, I mean, obviously he's a former champion, but he's just beaten Jamal Hill, finished Jamal Hill, obviously former champion, finished Glover Teixeira, one of the most dangerous guys in the light heavyweight division. And if we're talking in terms of resume, He's probably the #1 guy in the light heavyweight division outside of Alex Pereira. Now, I've heard a lot of people saying he deserves an immediate title shot. I disagree. He's been knocked out by Alex twice, with the second one being even worse than the first one. If Alex beats Ankalaev, we can't just throw him straight back in the deep end after beating Jamal Hill. I think he still needs that one extra fight, and I think the winner of Jan Blachowicz and Carlos Ulberg at UFC London would be that perfect fight for Jiri Prochazka to get back on track. Let's say Jan Blachowicz can beat Carlos Ulberg. You do a #1 contender fight, Jiri Prochazka versus Jan Blachowicz, and if Alex wants to move up to the heavyweight division, you can make it an interim title fight as well. So I think the winner of Blachowicz and Ulberg can take on Jiri Prochazka as like a #1 contender fight to see who faces Alex next. And then I think Roundtree should fight the loser. Roundtree's ranked #7, and he hasn't beaten anybody ranked above him, I believe. I know a lot of people want to see Roundtree in the top 5 again. You know, we had that really close fight with Poatan, performed better against Poatan than nearly every other light heavyweight apart from Jan Blachowicz. So I feel like the loser of Jan Blachowicz and Carlos Ulberg versus Roundtree would be a good fight to get Roundtree in the top 5. If Carlos Ulberg loses to Jan Blachowicz, he's lost to a veteran, then we can see a fight between two very solid and dangerous strikers between Khalil Roundtree and Carlos Ulberg. And if Jan Blachowicz loses to Carlos Ulberg, title contention is over for Jan Blachowicz. Let's see him in a fun fight between Khalil Roundtree. I just think this is a good move for Khalil Roundtree. We're not throwing him straight in the deep end like we did to Steve Erceg. After Steve Erceg had a close fight with Pantoja, we gave him Kai Kara-France and got knocked out. I don't want to see the same with Roundtree. Let's test how good he is against the top guys, against the loser of Blachowicz and Ulberg. Then for the middleweight division, in the middleweight division, we got, obviously, Drickerson, Strickland booked. We've got Adesanya and Imavov booked, so we can cross those guys off. The first fight I would make would be Roman Dolidze against the loser of Jared Cannonier and Gregory Rodriguez. I think Roman Dolidze might have just been booked against Marvin Vettori again. The rematch that nobody wants to see, but at least we get to see Vettori again. But either way, I just think this kind of makes sense. If Cannonier loses to Gregory Rodriguez, which he probably will, he's going to be on a 3-fight losing streak. Roman Dolidze, he's on a 2-fight winning streak. It kind of makes sense. It's a winnable fight for Jared Cannonier. It's a winnable fight for Roman Dolidze. And if Gregory Rodriguez loses to Jared Cannonier, he's just lost to his first top 10 opponent, but I feel like, again, Roman Dolidze is kind of like a winnable fight for Rodriguez. So there's not much thought into this matchup. I just think it makes sense. Roman Dolidze against the loser of Cannonier Rodriguez. Next fight I would make would be Marvin Vettori against the winner of MVP and Shariputta Magomedov. Now, MVP has stated that if he does beat Shariputta, he's moving back down to 170, and this is just a one-off fight in the middleweight division, so maybe this only applies to Shariputta Magomedov. But again, it's the only real fight we can do. I mean, I don't want to give Shariputta Magomedov a tailor-made title run, you know, not a title run, but a tailor-made path to the top 5. He's getting Shariputta Magomedov, he's getting MVP, very winnable fight for both of them, because obviously there's no grappling. If Shariputta can get past MVP, I say we give him somebody in the top 10, and I feel like Marvin Vettori is that perfect fight to test Shariputta, because we're not feeding him to an extremely dangerous grappler like Brendan Allen or Anthony Hernandez, where he's going to get completely mauled, but we're not giving him a super favorable matchup as well. I think Marvin Vettori, a guy who's a solid striker, solid wrestler, has been around the middleweight division for a long time, but has also had a bit of a 2-year layoff, is the perfect fight for Shariputta Magomedov to test how good he is if he can get past MVP. So, Magomedov versus Page. Winner faces Marvin Vettori. The next fight I would do is Robert Whittaker against the winner of Brendan Allen and Anthony Hernandez. Now, Anthony Hernandez is one of the best prospects in the middleweight division. He's an amazing grappler. He's got solid pressure boxing too. Brendan Allen's also got a very similar style of grappling, but he has just been beaten by Nasidim Imavov. This is kind of like a fight, in my opinion, where the winner can get somebody in the top 5. And I feel like there's no better opponent than Robert Whittaker, who's just been brutally finished by Khamzat Chimaev, who's still a top middleweight for them. If Anthony Hernandez can get past Brendan Allen, he's going to be in a huge winning streak. He's going to be this huge prospect. He's going to be in the top 10. And he's going to want somebody in the top 5. And I think Whittaker, who's just been finished by Chimaev, is that perfect fight for him. Because it either builds the name of, obviously, the winner of Allen and Hernandez off of Whittaker. So if Hernandez can beat Allen and then he goes and beats Whittaker, he's now in the top 5. He's now a big name. But it's also a winnable fight for Whittaker to get back on track against an up-and-coming guy. And also test his grappling, because he's just been absolutely mauled by Chimaev. Let's give him a lesser grappler and see how good his grappling is. So I would do Robert Whittaker against the winner of Anthony Hernandez and Brendan Allen. The next fight I would do would be Caio Borralho against the loser of Dricus du Plessis and Sean Strickland. Now, obviously, we've got UFC 312 main event, Strickland versus Dricus du Plessis. I think for Caio Borralho, he's ranked number 6. He's on a huge winning streak. Rather than giving him like a top fight as of yet, let's give him the loser of Dricus and Strickland. If Strickland loses to Dricus du Plessis, he's probably not going to be getting another title fight for a while, and he's going to have to fight somebody on the come-up. Now, obviously, Imavov's fighting Izzy, Chimaev's getting a title shot, and apart from that, there's no one really on the come-up, apart from Caio Borralho. And I feel like from a striking perspective, that'd be a really fun fight to see. And for Dricus du Plessis, if he loses to Strickland again, he's not going to be getting the next title shot. That's for Chimaev. He's going to have to fight somebody on the come-up, and I feel like Caio Bralot, again, is that guy. So Caio Bralot, in my opinion, in a number one contender, or not a number one contender fight, but in a title, a fight where if he wins, he can get a title shot against a loser of Dricus and Strickland, in my opinion. And then obviously Chimaev gets the winner. I mean, it should be Chimaev already instead of Sean Strickland, if we're being real. To go out there and finish Robert Whittaker in the way that he did, it should have been Dricus du Plessis versus Chimaev at UFC 312, but regardless, Chimaev, without a doubt, is getting the next title shot. Undefeated, mauled everyone, just absolutely destroyed Robert Whittaker at UFC Abu Dhabi. So Chimaev against the winner of Dricus and Strickland, regardless of who wins. And then for the welterweight division, I would do Jeff Neal versus Carlos Prates. Prates, big prospect in the welterweight division now. 4 wins in 2024, all of them coming by way of finish. Dangerous striker from the Fighting Nerds, just knocked out Neil Magny. Let's give him Jeff Neal. This fight really interests me because, again, we're not going to have to see Carlos Prates get fraud checked by a grappler. I've heard a lot of people saying Colby Covington versus Carlos Prates, but Covington's got a good chance of out-wrestling Carlos Prates in that fight, and I don't like the idea of one of welterweight's best prospects losing to Colby Covington. From a striking perspective, this is a really good fight. Jeff Neal, one of the best boxers in the welterweight division, just knocked out Rafael dos Anjos. Carlos Prates, this big striking prospect. From a striking perspective, this would be such a good fight. Either to get Jeff Neal back on track, not back on track because he's coming off a win, but a huge win for Jeff Neal against a prospect, an undefeated prospect in the UFC, or for Carlos Prates to get into the top 10 by knocking out or beating one of the best strikers in that division. Jeff Neal versus Prates, Fight Night main event, banger of a fight. Colby Covington versus Vicente Luque. Covington is one of the most washed guys in the welterweight division right now. Obviously, he was once a title challenger, once one of the top dogs in the division, but he's massively fell off. Losing to the likes of Kamaru Usman, getting beaten comfortably by Leon Edwards, and then just recently getting absolutely battered by Buckley and finished. He's now number 9. I want to see him versus Vicente Luque. Luque was once in that same position of Covington where he was kind of a bit washed. He was losing fights on a consistent basis, but he just went out there and absolutely demolished Temba Garimbo, finished him within a minute. I think we give him Colby Covington. You know, it's two guys who are kind of in a similar position where they're both a bit washed, but they've still got some sort of skills. I think for a Fight Night main event, this can be really interesting. It gets Luque in the top 10. It's a winnable fight for Colby Covington as well, because I can see Covington out grappling Vicente Luque. So Luque versus Covington, Fight Night main event. I don't mind that matchup. Or just stick it somewhere like a lower end of the main card of a pay-per-view. Next fight I would do Sean Brady versus Ian Garry. Now, I would have done Sean Brady versus Leon Edwards for UFC London, but obviously we've now recently got Edwards versus Madlena, which is booked, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But yeah, I think Garry versus Sean Brady makes a bit of sense. Gary's still one of the top guys in the division. He lost to Shavkat, but he lost a very close fight to Shavkat. And apart from that, he's beaten every welterweight he's faced. And I think we give another top 5 guy, and I think Sean Brady's that top 5 guy. Brady's in the top 5. He's also on a bit of a winning streak. Just recently beat Gilbert Burns. He got finished on the feet by Bilal Muhammad, though, which isn't a good look. I think we do Brady versus Garry. You know, it's a fight to get them both, you know, in the top 5. It's a fight to put them both back into title picture. If Brady can beat Garry, give Brady number 1 contender fight. If Garry can beat Brady, give Garry another contenders fight as well. I think this is just a fun fight. Grappler versus striker. Sean Brady versus Ian Garry. I think that makes a lot of sense. The next fight I would do would be Kamaru Usman versus Joaquin Buckley. Yeah, this fight needs to happen. I don't know what's going on with Usman. He's been called out by so many welterweights and he's just not fighting. I don't know what he's kind of trying to do with his career, but I think this makes all the sense. Joaquin Buckley's, in my opinion, 1 fight away from a title shot. One of the best years in 2024 where he got 4 wins in that year, 3 stoppages. Finished Colby Covington in the last card of the year. Knocked out Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Beat Vicente Luque as well by finish. We've got to give a big fight for Joaquin Buckley, and it's got to be a number 1 contender fight. Let's give him former champion, one of the greatest welterweights of all time, Kamaru Usman. I mean, from a stylistic perspective, this is really fun because Buckley's known for being this really good wrestler. Usman's been known for being this really good wrestler. Usman developed striking in the later half of his title picture. Buckley's got really good striking. If we want to give Usman another fight, let's give him Joaquin Buckley. I think I would definitely favour Buckley in this fight. I can see him going out there and just not battering, but beating Kamaru Usman comfortably. It's that next step after Colby Covington against Usman. And if he can beat Usman, give him a title shot. And I actually think he's one of the toughest guys for Bilal Muhammad. But if Usman can somehow pull off a win over Joaquin Buckley, he's just beating a huge guy on the come-up in the welterweight division. That's a huge win for Kamaru Usman. And it's kind of like a feel-good win in the welterweight division. So I think we do Usman versus Buckley. And we've obviously got Burns versus Morales booked and Edwards versus Madlena, so we've got to cross those guys off too, meaning the title fight has to be Bilal Muhammad versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. This goes without saying. I mean, Shavkat was going to be getting the title shot regardless at UFC 310. Bilal Muhammad pulled out. They did a number 1 contender fight. Got his first decision win in his entire career, but he's still undefeated. He beat Ian Gary, who was also undefeated at the time. Doesn't really, it goes without saying. Shavkat versus Bilal needs to happen in the first half of 2025. Next division is the lightweight division. Renato Moicano versus Yoel Alvarez. Now, I know I did Renato Moicano versus Michael Chandler, but I've kind of looked at the state of the lightweight division, and I've kind of had to change a couple of the matchups, but I think this is a really good fight. Yoel Alvarez, he's no longer ranked, but that's not because he lost or anything. That's just because they brought in Grant Dawson. One of the best up-and-coming guys, and one of the most dangerous lightweights on the world. He's got I think he's got 22-3 as a record, with all of his wins coming by way of stoppage. Amazing jiu-jitsu, decent striking. I think this is a really good fight, because I'm interested to see how Moicano would do and what his game plan would be against Yoel Alvarez, because I still believe that Moicano has potential to make it to the top 5 of the lightweight division despite just losing to Makhachev recently. And I feel like doing it against a dangerous up-and-coming guy like Yoel Alvarez can be a really good fight to test. And after Moicano, I want to see how dangerous his grappling would be against another dangerous grappler in Yoel Alvarez. I want to see how their striking would match up. And it's a big opportunity for Yoel Alvarez as well, because if he can beat a big name in Moicano, that gets him in the top 10. That potentially gets him a top 5 fight after that. So, Renato Moicano, Yoel Alvarez, I think it makes sense. Next fight I would do would be Mateusz Gamrot versus Grant Dawson. Grant Dawson's now in the top 15 and he deserves a big fight. He's won like 9 times, maybe 10 times in the UFC, and his only loss is a 30-second knockout to Bobby Green, which is a bad loss, but that's his only loss in the UFC. He's taken and mauled everyone. I think from a wrestling perspective, this would be such an interesting fight. If you're a fan of grappling, you'd be a fan of this fight. Mateusz Gamrot, really good wrestler. Some people even say he'd be one of the biggest wrestling problems for Islam Makhachev in the division. Grant Dawson, big up-and-coming American wrestler. Let's see a wrestler versus a wrestler. Mateusz Gamrot, who just got beaten by Dan Hooker, against Grant Dawson, who's on a huge winning streak. Grant Dawson versus Mateusz Gamrot. I think is a really fun fight to make from a grappling perspective. Maybe it cancels out and we see them strike, but we saw when Gamrot faced Arman Tsarukyan how fun that fight was with just the wrestling alone, and I think we could see a very similar fight between Grant Dawson and Mateusz Gamrot. So Gamrot versus Dawson I think should be made next. Next fight I would do would be Michael Chandler versus Beneil Dariush. Beneil Dariush, he got done dirty at UFC 311. He was ready to fight on the main card against Moicano, and despite making weight, despite being fine, he had to be kicked off the card so that Moicano could get the title fight. Now the UFC did say they compensated him, but we've got to give him a big fight next. And I feel like Michael Chandler is that really big fight for Beneil Dariush, because Michael Chandler's a big name. He's a pay-per-view star. And it's a winnable fight for Beneil Dariush as well. I think he'd appreciate a fight against Michael Chandler. And it does more for his career at this stage than a Moicano, because he's gone from getting the number 10 guy to the number 7 guy too. And for Michael Chandler, he doesn't deserve anyone ranked above him anymore, in my opinion. He's lost, I think he's 2-4 in the UFC. 3 of those losses by finish, I believe, or at least 2 of them are. Stop giving Michael Chandler these big fights. His best win is a knockout over Dan Hooker in his debut and Tony Ferguson. Let's see him against a guy who's still in the top 10, who's still winnable for Michael Chandler, but he's still somebody who we can kind of test his skills against. Beneil Dariush versus Michael Chandler, pay-per-view main card, to compensate Beneil Dariush and to test the skills of Michael Chandler without just constantly rewarding him when he doesn't deserve it, I think should be the fight next for both of them. The fight after that I would do is Dustin Poirier versus Max Holloway for the BMF belt. If you saw my video where I kind of remade UFC 300, this was one of the fights I made. Now, this is a fight that I hope we see in 2025. Dustin Poirier, for his last fight in his entire career, you can't give him a better last fight than the BMF champion, Max Holloway. When the last time we saw Holloway in the lightweight division, he had an amazing performance against Justin Gaethje and slept him in the last round. I think this will be much more competitive. 2 of the best boxers in the lightweight division, 2 veterans, 2 guys who you know are going to put up a good fight, 2 guys worthy of that BMF belt, 2 guys who have just been finished in their last fight. For Dustin Poirier's final fight, give him a BMF title shot against Max Holloway in one last dance against somebody like Max Holloway. I love this fight. I think it should be made. Dustin Poirier versus Holloway for the BMF belt. Next fight I would do Arman Tsarukyan against the winner of Justin Gaethje and Dan Hooker. Tsarukyan's in this tough fight now because Dana White said that Tsarukyan isn't going to be getting the next title shot, and I know a lot of people want to see like a #1 contender fight again between Tsarukyan and Oliveira, but if that's the case, then who the hell do we see Islam Makhachev fight? He's got no opponent. So I think we've kind of got to see Oliveira versus Makhachev, and in the meantime, there's no one left really for Tsarukyan. I mean, if we're doing Poirier versus Holloway and Gaethje versus Hooker's booked, and everyone else is booked, the only other guy we can do him against is the winner of Justin Gaethje and Dan Hooker. I know if Justin Gaethje versus Dan Hooker is going to be a banger, we're going to want to see them against another kind of banger of a fight against maybe somebody like Oliveira, but if Gaethje versus Hooker, if the winner of that fight obviously beats their opponent, if obviously Justin Gaethje beats Dan Hooker or Hooker beats Gaethje, they're going to be in a position for like a #1 contender fight. And Sarukian, who's coming off a win, but he's still not going to be able to get a title shot in his next fight, I think would be the only real option for it next. I know Sarukian will probably maul the winner of this, and it's not really a competitive fight, but it's the only fight, in my opinion, that kind of makes sense. Winner of Gaethje and Hooker against Sarukian is kind of like a #1 contender fight. And obviously, like I said before, Oliveira getting the next title shot against Islam Makhachev. I don't mind this either, to be fair. Since losing to Islam Makhachev, Oliveira's finished Benil Dariush in the first round. He had a very close fight with Arman Sarukian in which he lost, and he absolutely dominated Michael Chandler, where he actually displayed really good wrestling. So, Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev. I don't mind this rematch at this current stage. Give the title shot to Oliveira. It is what it is. Next fight in the featherweight division now. I think we do Calvin Kattar versus Lerone Murphy. Lerone Murphy's a good prospect that isn't really getting talked about enough, in my opinion, in the featherweight division. He's undefeated. He's very well-rounded. He's very tough and durable. He's got everything going for him, does Lerone Murphy, for a good prospect. He's not one of these loud, brash personalities, but he's definitely on the come-up. And I think we give him somebody in the top 10. He's beaten Dan Ige. He's beaten Edson Barboza. Let's give him somebody in the top 10. And I feel like Calvin Kattar is that guy. Kattar's ranked number 10, and he's still a very tough fight for Lerone Murphy. He's got very slick boxing, but he's lost to so many guys ranked above him now as Calvin Kattar. Like, he's lost to more guys in the top 10 than he's beaten. He needs to fight somebody lower ranked, and I feel like Lerone Murphy, Calvin Kattar make sense of their current stages in their career. Calvin Kattar's just been dominated by Aljamain Sterling. He's lost to Josh Emmett. He's lost to Arnold Allen. He's lost to, obviously, Max Holloway as well. We have to give him Lerone Murphy, in my opinion. Push Lerone Murphy. Give Calvin Kattar a step down. Makes sense, in my opinion. Next fight I would make would be Aljamain Sterling versus Bryce Mitchell. This would be a really fun fight. Bryce Mitchell just went out there and got a good win over Kron Gracie. Aljamain Sterling on the same card lost to Movsar Evloev in a very close fight. He's ranked number 9. Bryce Mitchell's ranked number 13th, I believe. Let's just put a grappler versus a grappler. I'm interested to see how the grappling would match up, because obviously Sterling's one of the best wrestlers in the featherweight division right now. Bryce Mitchell's still a top grappler, and he showed that in his last fight. Let's see a good, like a former champion against a personality in Bryce Mitchell. Stick it on a pay-per-view. Sterling versus Mitchell. I think this would be a really good fight. Imagine the build-up between this fight. Imagine this just started going at it at the press conference. Either way, Bryce Mitchell, Aljamain Sterling. Let's do it. Next fight I would do would be Brian Ortega versus Josh Emmett. This is another fight that makes sense, in my opinion. Josh Emmett, he's been out for over a year now, but he has just come off a brutal knockout win over Bryce Mitchell, where he sent him unconscious at UFC 296. Brian Ortega has always been known for being a top featherweight, but he's just lost to, who did he just beat? He got beaten by Diego Lopez in his most recent fight. He's now ranked number 6. I think this makes sense. It gets Josh Emmett close to the top 5. It's a step down in competition for Brian Ortega. There's not really any more thought process about it. Brian Ortega versus Josh Emmett. Step up for Emmett, step down for Ortega. Let's do it. Next fight I would do is Yair Rodriguez versus Arnold Allen. Now, I'm hearing rumors that we're going to be seeing Yair Rodriguez versus Diego Lopez, which, even though that's a fun fight, I don't think it really makes any sense. Lopez should be getting a title shot, in my opinion. So I want to see Yair Rodriguez versus Arnold Allen. Arnold Allen, he's had 2 losses in the featherweight division, but he lost to Max Holloway, and he had a decent performance against Holloway as well. And he lost to Movsar Evloev in a very close fight. Yair Rodriguez has just been finished by Brian Ortega, so we need to step down. Arnold Allen's just beating Giga Chikadze. Arnold Allen versus Yair Rodriguez. This should have been like for UFC Mexico. This should have been the main event of UFC Mexico. Allen versus Yair Rodriguez. I think it'll be a banger of a fight. Allen comes to scrapping every single fight. Yair Rodriguez, amazing kickboxer, one of the best in the featherweight division. It's a step down for Yair. It's a step up for Arnold Allen. Arnold Allen even himself called for this fight. I think it made all the sense. So Yair Rodriguez versus Arnold Allen makes sense, in my opinion. Next fight I would do would be for a #1 contender fight, Alexander Volkanovski versus Movsar Evloev. I know Volkanovski deserves a title shot. He's one of the greatest featherweights of all time. He does deserve a title shot, but do we really want to see him thrown in the deep end straight away against Topuria? Because if he was to put in there with Topuria again, it would probably go the exact same way as the first time. I want to see Alexander Volkanovski like a bit of a warm-up. I want to see him warm up. He's been out for a year, as he should be. We don't know how good he's going to look. I want to see him in a danger-free matchup against Movsar Evloev. Evloev, he's definitely in that position where he's 1 fight away from a title shot. You know, he's got 4 ranked wins. He's undefeated. Beating Alexander Volkanovski would undoubtedly be the biggest win of his career, and it would secure him that title fight. But I think it's also a winnable fight for Alexander Volkanovski without having to worry about the threat of getting knocked out by somebody like Movsar Evloev. So Volkanovski versus Evloev, #1 contender fight, warm up for Volkanovski, big opportunity for Evloev I think should be made, while Diego Lopez gets the title shot against Ilia Topuria. Yeah, Diego Lopez earned that title shot, in my opinion, when he beat Brian Ortega. I'm pretty sure Ortega was number 3 at the time of beating him. He's been on this roll. He's got 3 ranked wins. He's on the huge winning streak. He's Diego Lopez, fun fighter. I think he earned that title shot against Ilia Topuria, and Topuria needs to defend against somebody in the weight class. Diego Lopez on a bit of a winning streak is that fresh opponent for Ilia Topuria. So that would be me matchmaking the featherweight division. Now, for the bantamweight division, we've already got 2 fights booked. We've got Rob Font versus Dominic Cruz. We've got Henry Cejudo versus Song Yadong. They're going to be taking each other on the same fight now at UFC Seattle. So those guys are crossed off. So the first fight I would make would be Mario Batista versus Marlon Vera. Mario Batista might be the most hated fighter in the UFC right now. He had that really boring performance against Jose Aldo where he just about got the win. He is coming off a couple of wins. He's in the top 10. He's going to have to fight somebody ranked above him. And I feel like Marlon Vera is that good opponent. Vera, he's still a top guy, but he hasn't really proven himself to be top 5 worthy. He got beaten comfortable by Davison Figueiredo, beaten comfortable by Corey Sandhagen, battered by Sean O'Malley, and his last win was Pedro Munoz by decision, who's not even ranked anymore. So I think we do Vera versus Batista. It's a step down in competition for Marlon Vera against a guy that everybody hates and a guy that everyone is going to be rooting for Vera to win. But it's also a chance for Mario Batista. If you can beat Marlon Vera, it gets you at number 6. It gets you close to that top 5 of the bantamweight division. So Mario Batista versus Marlon Vera makes sense in my opinion. The next fight I would do would be Umar Nurmagomedov versus the winner of Henry Cejudo and Song Yadong. Umar Nurmagomedov is still one of the top bantamweights, but he's only had 1 ranked win. He beat Corey Sandhagen by decision. Great win. And then he lost to Merab in a very close fight, but a very convincing fight for Merab. So Umar's in that position where we need to see him against somebody in the top 10. You know, I don't want to see him against another title opponent like Sean O'Malley or Peter Yan. I want him to prove that he's still title worthy against the winner of Henry Cejudo and Song Yadong. If Cejudo can beat Song Yadong, I mean, he was already this former champion, this former double champion in the UFC. He lost to Sterling, he lost to Merab, just like Umar Nurmagomedov. I think from a wrestling perspective and just a stylistic perspective, Cejudo versus Umar Nurmagomedov could be a really good fight. And then if Song Yadong can get a win over Henry Cejudo, that's a massive win for Song Yadong. Maybe we do Umar Nurmagomedov against Song Yadong, because Song Yadong at that time would be ranked number 7. Maybe that makes a bit of sense. So either way, Umar Nurmagomedov against the winner of Cejudo and Song Yadong, I think makes sense. The next fight I would do would be Davison Figueiredo versus Corey Sandhagen. One of the highest level fights you can make in the UFC right now, in my opinion, is Davison Figueiredo versus Corey Sandhagen. They're not necessarily title worthy. Figueiredo couldn't get past Peter Yan. Corey Sandhagen couldn't get past Umar Nurmagomedov, but they're still extremely well-rounded. They're still some of the top guys, and they're still some of the highest level fighters in the UFC. This would be, like I said before, one of the highest level fights you can make in the UFC. Fight night main event in a crowded arena. Corey Sandhagen versus Davison Figueiredo is an absolute banger. And he's got big implications because I feel like the winner of this fight would only be 1 fight away from a title shot as well. Like if Figueiredo can go out there and get a win over Corey Sandhagen, give Figueiredo a number 1 contender fight and then give him a title fight, you know what I mean? So Figgy versus Sandhagen as a big opportunity fight and just such a high level fight, I think makes sense. The next fight I would do would be Sean O'Malley versus Peter Yan number 2. O'Malley and Yan are in this pretty similar career stage where they're both kind of like 1 fight away from a title shot. Sean O'Malley is a former champion, and he did lose to Merab, but he had a pretty decent performance against Merab, but he ended up falling short just as everyone else does. I know a lot of people want to see him get an immediate title fight because he's this big superstar, but he hasn't earned that because he hasn't got a single win since losing to Merab. Peter Yan, he once was on a bit of a losing streak, got dominated by Merab, but he's pulled his socks back up. He got a win over Song Yadong, and he recently got that really good win over Davison Figueiredo. I feel like that 1 more win for Peter Yan could be against the guy that he's lost to before, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think just from like a stylistic perspective, I mean, we've seen it before. It was one of the best fights of 2022. It would be an absolute banger from a striking perspective. And the winner of this fight can get back in the title picture and get a title shot against Merab or against Merab's opponent, who I think he should fight, in which Merab should fight Pantoja. Pantoja, in my opinion, out of all the champions, is most deserving of moving up a weight class than anybody else. You know, he's cleared out the flyweight division. There's literally no one else for Pantoja to fight. He's beaten nearly everyone in the top 10 now. He's having to lap the division now. Give Pantoja that double champ opportunity. Give Pantoja that fight with Merab. In my opinion, even though I think Merab would still beat Pantoja, just giving Pantoja that big fight, I think he's earned it now. And even like this is a huge fight for both of them. Pantoja's getting a fight against another champion. This is the biggest fight that Pantoja can possibly get right now. Merab gets to fight another champion, one of the pound for pound best in the UFC. Champion versus champion, super fight in the lower weight classes. Pantoja versus Merab, 2 guys that are absolutely killing it in both of their divisions. I think makes sense. So Merab versus Pantoja, and then finally for the flyweight division, we've got a few fights booked, but the first fight I would do is Tim Elliott versus Charles Johnson. Yeah, I think this makes sense. Charles Johnson, he won 4 times in 2024. He's kind of made a name for himself in the flyweight division. He's now made it in the top 15. And I think taking on a veteran in Tim Elliott makes sense. Elliott is a weird fighter where he's not washed because he can pull off a win every now and then, but he's not the most consistent. Like, he's not good enough to make it in the top 10, but he's not bad enough to lose to these up-and-coming guys, is Tim Elliott. And I feel like he's like the perfect guy to kind of test prospects on, and that's why I put him against Charles Johnson. If Charles Johnson can go out there and beat Tim Elliott, that's a big win for Charles Johnson. He's now going to be in the top 10. We can now give him some big fights from now on. And if Tim Elliott can beat Charles Johnson, he's just done his normal job of gatekeeping the top 10. That maybe shows us that Charles Johnson isn't ready for the top 10 as of right now. So Charles Johnson versus Tim Elliott, I think, should be made for the flyweight division. The next fight I would do is Steve Erceg versus Joshua Van. This is a complete banger. Joshua Van is one of the best boxers in the flyweight division. Steve Erceg is one of the best boxers in the flyweight division. This would be such a fun fight to see on the feet. Joshua Van just absolutely battered Cody Durden. Like I said, I think he's the best boxer in the division. Really good boxing. His body shots, just his combinations on the feet are amazing. And Steve Erceg, he has fallen short a lot recently. Obviously, he displayed really good boxing when he faced Matt Schnell. Has a really close fight and nearly beats Pantoja, and then he gets a bit of a dangerous guy in Kakao France and ends up getting knocked out. So I think we give Steve Erceg the number 15th or 14th rank, whatever he is, Joshua Van, and I think this should just be a really fun fight, and it makes sense. We're giving Steve Erceg a step down. We're giving Joshua Van a chance to fight in the top 10. 2 very high-level boxers, Joshua Van versus Steve Erceg. This should have been for UFC 312 in my opinion, so Erceg, Van, banger of a fight. Next fight I would do is Alex Perez versus Tagir Ulanbekov. Now, Tagir Ulanbekov recently got a good win at UFC 311 over, who did he beat? I forgot who he beat, but he beat Clayton Carpenter is who he beat. But Clayton Carpenter's unranked. Tagir Ulanbekov, in my opinion, now deserves somebody in the top 10. He's looking better in every fight. He's got good striking, really good wrestling, trains with the likes of Khabib. I think we're giving somebody in the top 10. Not somebody too highly ranked because he did lose to Tim Elliott. And I think Alex Perez is that perfect opponent. Perez is another one of these gatekeepers. He's another one of these kind of old, kind of veteran gatekeepers. He had a good start to 2024, got a knockout win over Mateusz Nicolau, then got injured and lost to Tatsuro Taira, so he's going to have to fight down the rankings. He's been out for quite some time now. To Alex Perez, Tagir Ulanbekov, to get Ulanbekov in the top 10 and for a chance for Perez to get another good win, I think makes sense. Ulanbekov, Perez, fight night on the Apex somewhere. Next fight I would do is, well, obviously we've got Manel Kape and Brandon Royval booked, so that's the fight that we need to cross off. But the next fight I would do is Azuam Abayev versus Amir Albazi. 2 heavy wrestlers going at it. I think this makes sense. Amir Albazi just got smoked by Brandon Moreno in what we thought was going to be a number 1 contender fight. So obviously he's going to have to fight down the rankings. Azuam Abayev is number 8. I think he's like 22-1. He's got this great record. In his most recent fight, he out-wrestled and kind of dominated Mateusz Nicolau. He's now in the top 8 of the flyweight division. He deserves somebody ranked above him. And I feel like Amir Albazi coming off a loss is that fight to make. And I feel like not only does it make sense, but again, it could be fun because Amir Albazi, solid wrestler. Azuam Abayev, solid wrestler. Both pretty even on the feet. It gets Amabayev in the top 3 and legitimizes himself as a potential contender for Pantoja, who he hasn't faced yet. So, potential number 1 contender fight for Amabayev. Albazi versus Amabayev makes sense. Next fight I would do is Tatsuro Taira versus Brandon Moreno. Yeah, this could be another kind of number 1 contender fight. We need to keep creating these contender fights in the flyweight division because Pantoja's already lapped the division, and I feel like this makes sense. Now, Moreno is coming off a really good win over Amir Albazi where he smoked him, but we can't see him getting another fight with Pantoja. First reason being, he's lost to him 3 different times, and even in 2024, he started off the year by losing to Brandon Royval, so he needs that 1 extra win, in my opinion, to get him that title fight, and I feel like Tatsuro Taira is that guy. Taira, he is coming off a loss to Brandon Royval in what was a complete banger and a very close fight, but he lost to Royval. Let's give him Brandon Moreno. Still a top guy for Tatsuro Taira to test his skills on. I think this just makes a lot of sense, in my opinion. Tatsuro Taira, Brandon Moreno would be a banger of a fight in like a fight night main event. Yeah, number 1 contender fight potentially makes sense. And then I would give Kai Kara France the title shot against Pantoja. Obviously, I said Pantoja should move up to the bantamweight division, but in the flyweight division, Tatsuro Taira, Kai Kara France against Pantoja makes sense. Kai Kara France just knocked out Steve Erceg. He kind of got robbed against Amir Albazi. I think he has earned that title fight now. He's like the only real fresh contender for Pantoja anymore. So, and he's actually stylistically quite bad for Pantoja because he's a really good defensive grappler and he's dangerous on the feet. Either way, Kakao France against Pantoja makes sense in my opinion. And that is, in my opinion, how I would matchmake every UFC ranked top 10 fighter. Let me know if you agree, disagree with these fights. Thank you for watching.